Would the clerk please call the roll to establish a quorum?
Yes, thank you. Just before I do that, just a reminder to please mute your device. Our board members are familiar with that announcement, but our guest presenters today, if you can please mute your devices, that will prevent some feedback. Also, we accept and encourage public comment throughout the meeting, and instructions for providing public comment are included at the top of our meeting agenda. I'll go ahead and take roll. Director Baines.
Present.
Bernasconi. Absent. Bradford.
Here.
Branscombe. I see him in my list that he is present. I'll mark him so.
Oh, here,
Boulahan.
I'm sorry, I didn't have my mic on. Sorry.
Thank you, Director
Okay,
Branscombe. And Boulahan, thank you. Burris.
Present.
Clark Kretz. Here. Desmond.
Here.
Frericks.
Here.
Frost. Here. Gallardo.
Yes.
Gog.
Yes.
Gore.
Here.
Guerrero. I see that.
Here. Sorry.
Thank you. That's okay. Director Harris.
Here.
Joyner. Absent Kozlowski.
Here.
Lozano.
Here.
Middleton. Absent New.
Here.
Sander. Absent Saragosa.
Here.
Saylor.
Here.
Chenier.
Here.
Spokley.
Here.
Stallard.
Here.
Soon.
Here.
Thomas. Here. West. Absent Vice Chair Kennedy.
Here.
Chair Jennings is absent, and ex officio member Takar for Benny Paul.
Here.
Thank you.
I believe clerk has a message.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Kennedy. I just announced what I needed, so I think we're all set.
Great. Thank you very much. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment?
We do not have any public comment at this time.
That brings us to consent. We have items 1 through 10 on consent. Are there any members of the board that have any questions or would like to remove anything from consent for consideration?
Saragosa moves. Baines second.
We have a motion by Saragosa, a second by Baines. Do we have any public comment?
No public comment.
Please roll call vote.
Thank you. Director Baines.
Aye.
Bernasconi. Absent Bradford.
Aye.
Branscombe.
Aye.
Boulahan.
Aye.
Burris.
Aye.
Clark Kretz.
Aye.
Desmond.
Aye.
Frericks.
Aye.
Frost.
Aye.
Gallardo.
Aye.
Gog.
Yes.
Gore.
Aye.
Guerrero.
Aye.
Harris.
Yes.
Joyner.
I just joined the meeting, so I'm going to abstain on this one.
Okay, thank you. Kozlowski.
Yes.
Lozano.
Aye.
Middleton. Absent New.
Aye.
Sander. Absent Saragosa.
Aye.
Saylor.
Aye.
Chenier.
Aye.
Spokley. Director Spokley, could you indicate your vote, please? I'll come back to you. Stallard.
Aye.
Soon.
Aye.
Thomas. Aye. West. Absent Vice Chair Kennedy.
Aye.
Chair Jennings is absent, and Director Spokley, could you indicate your vote? Okay, I'll mark him absent. No, motion carries.
Thank you. Will the clerk please read item 11 into the record?
Thank you. Item number 11 is, action item number 12
Oh,
is consideration of a resolution endorsing SACOG's application to the U.S. Department of Transportation, and Christina Svensk of SACOG staff would be presenting this item.
Hi, good morning. I'm going to share my screen for you all. Give me one moment. Are you all able to see
yes.
the presentation? Great. Okay. So we are intending to submit a raise application during this upcoming round with the US DOT for what we are calling, well, we're coming up with a name, but it is a 6-county effort to kind of focus investments and transportation infrastructure across the 6 counties that focus on low carbon and low VMT modes. So little history about the RAISE grant. So this was formerly the BUILD grant program. It offers both planning and capital grants, each with a minimum award of $5 million and a 20% local match is required. The RAISE program goals are based off of the current key administration goals. So you can see here on the screen, there's a general trend to shift focus from the traditional way of approaching roadways and mobility and moving more towards a more efficient system that addresses many of the concepts we at SACOG here are already emphasizing through our efforts like the blueprint, Green Means Go, and other key initiatives. So we are planning to submit an application that designs, as I mentioned, a 6-county regional program focused on transportation infrastructure. The key concepts will be investments that help expand and increase low carbon and low VMT travel opportunities, and a program that promotes both innovation and equity. We anticipate having a program that truly is all encompassing with infrastructure touching everything from bike and pedestrian facilities to clean truck facilities, given the importance of freight and logistics in our region. The program will recognize the different challenges faced by each of our counties and communities within the region. And so we really aim to overcome those with viable solutions that promote carbon reduction strategies at all levels and ultimately set our region up for success for future grant opportunities and future program development. The project itself is somewhat modeled after green zones in that we plan to identify key areas where infrastructure investments should be focused to achieve our goals and those of the state. There's a strong regional coordination with this at all levels. Not only do we plan to work closely with our partners in all counties, the individual jurisdictions and our transit providers, but also at the community level through CBOs and other non-government organizations. And to highlight this from the start, we're really excited to have some key partners as applicants with us. PCTPA, EDCTC, and WAC Sacramento will all be co-applicants and active participants in the project, among others that we're still kind of identifying and working out. But those are some really, I think, good ways to illustrate how we're really trying to approach this from a cohesive regional standpoint. And make sure that we're crafting something that works for all of the communities in our region. There's something in this program for everyone, whether it's a rural car share program to increase mobility in difficult to serve areas, or zero emission vehicle charging infrastructure for transit or freight vehicles, or even safety improvements that are necessary to make people more comfortable with walking or biking. The proposed work would include identifying zones in the 6-county region and prioritizing projects within those zones, which we'll do at the county level. So each county will have their own set of priorities to work from. So we're starting our application now, and we'll continue to refine the concept through that, as well as continued engagement with our partners throughout the process. Submittals for the applications are due April 14th, and awards are anticipated to be announced in fall of 2022. So the actions before you, it's 2-part. I won't read everything that's on the screen, but essentially the first part of the recommendation is to endorse our submittal of the application and adopt the resolution that was attached with your staff report, but also authorize the board authorized SACOG to assign up to $1.5 million for local match from the SACOG managed fund for the application to meet that 20% match requirement for the project. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions from the board? And Lynette, help me out. You think you can see better than I can?
I don't see any raised hands.
Okay. Is there any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay, I have a question. Rick, we have up to $1.5 million and the grant is a minimum of $5 million. So, and 20% match. So that's not, there's not a lot of room there. So what if we're successful in getting more than the minimum?
More than the minimum of the grant?
Yes.
We are applying for the $5 million.
Oh, we are? Okay,
minimum. Yeah.
got it. Okay, thank you. Any questions? Is there a motion?
Chair.
Mr.
Oh,
Saylor seconds.
who made the motion?
Baines.
Baines, thank you, and Saylor seconds. Please roll call vote.
Thank you. Director Baines,
Aye.
Bernasconi, absent Bradford,
Aye.
Branscombe,
Aye.
Houlihan,
Aye.
Burris,
Aye.
Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Desmond,
Aye.
Frericks,
Aye.
Frost,
Aye.
Galdo,
Aye.
Gog,
Yes.
Gore,
Aye.
Guerrero,
Aye.
Harris,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Kozlowski. Director Kozlowski, could you indicate your vote, please? I'll come back to you. Lozano,
Aye.
Middleton, absent New,
Aye.
Sander, absent Zaragoza,
Aye.
Saylor,
Aye.
Chenier,
Aye.
Stokely,
Yep.
Stallard,
Aye.
Soon,
Aye.
Thomas,
Aye.
West, absent Vice Chair Kennedy,
Aye.
Chair Jennings is absent. Director Kozlowski, if you're there, could you indicate your vote? Okay, I'll mark him absent, but motion carries.
Thank you. Mr. Corliss.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair Kennedy. I just want to, I appreciate the vote, and Christina did a great job explaining this application. We had a good, brief but good discussion in the Transportation Committee. But I just want to bring it home when Christina talked a little bit about this is modeled after green zones. So we've been talking with many of you. I've been talking with many of you. I've been talking with Director Baines about what would it look like to actually have a clean freight and clean truck, strategy and fueling station in Sutter County and Yuba City. And actually, we've been able to repurpose some SACOG planning funds to look at with the proliferation of trucks in Yuba Sutter. How do we get ahead of some of the curves on clean fueling? We've talked about, and Christina mentioned, a rural EV car share program, right? What does it look like? We can't serve rural areas with transit. Is there something we could test that looks like some kind of a clean car sharing program? How do we make micro transit work outside the urban core? And this grant is a way to stitch all of that together in a strategy with a heavy emphasis on engagement and equity. And that's why Christina mentioned Walk Sacramento, now renamed Civic Thread. And also, I think, positions as well for some new funding that's coming from the feds called the Carbon Reduction Program. It's in my mind, it's really the framework to be able to go after those funds. We get some of those funds in the metropolitan region, and a lot of others will have to apply for. A lot of the electric charging funds we have to apply for. We've got to be competitive. We have to have a plan. And so we're excited about this grant because we think it's truly a regional 6-county approach to sort of having a vision, having a plan, and going to go get the money. So again, thanks for your support on this one, and more to come.
Thank you. And thank you, Christina, for the presentation. Next item, please.
Next item is action item number 13, approve the memorandum of understanding with SACOG Employees Association and adoption of salary schedules. And the presenter for this is Eric Johnson.
Hi, good morning, members of the board. I'm happy to be back in front of you today to report that we've reached an agreement with our Employees Association on a 5-year memorandum of understanding. There's 2 parts of the action in front of you today. The first is review and approval of the MOU with the Employees Association and authorizing the executive director to execute that agreement. The second part is adopting a salary schedule and reporting orally on the final action on that. I briefly just wanted to give you an overview in public session on what is contained in the MOU that's attached to the item today. As I mentioned, this is a 5-year agreement. One of the key things that we've added since we last spoke with you is an economic conditioners reopener. And then I'll briefly touch on the other components of the MOU. But before doing that, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the budget impact on this. This is assumed in the preliminary draft budget that we've assembled for the 22-23 fiscal year. And so we can report that we are able to absorb all the costs that are associated with the MOU. I think it's important to highlight that there are some significant cost increases on the salary side, but they're offset by some significant reductions in some of our benefit costs. The result of which is approximately $178,000 in new costs for each of the 5 years. This represents about 1.7% of our total payroll costs. When you combine our salary and benefits for all of our employees, that's approximately $11 million. A couple of things I just wanted to highlight regarding the budget impact is, as I mentioned, one of the significant things is reducing our a couple of our benefits. Reducing the paid time off amount that employees are allowed to carry will result in $120,000 of cost savings. Our most significant piece is on the medical cash in lieu. So currently we allow employees to cash up a lot of their medical benefits if they don't need insurance from SACOG or they don't need the full value of the insurance. That's almost $750,000. And then in our last MOU with the Employees Association, we started something that was relatively unique in our region, which is having employees pay for a portion of the employer costs for CalPERS pension obligations, and that continues in this MOU. And so we know that we've saved at least $130,000 over the last 5 years, and we think those savings will grow in the next 5 years of this MOU. So specifically to the new provision on the economic conditioners reopener, what we've agreed to with the Employees Association is if the revenues that really go towards the cost of our salaries and benefits drop by 10% in any given fiscal year, that we'll reopen the MOU specifically around the cost of living adjustment that's included in this MOU. So the first provision of the MOU that I wanted to cover is our market pay adjustments. We went out and had an independent consultant provide a review of 14 other public agencies that are either similar in the scope of the work they do, or they are similar in their size of agencies inside our region and around the state that do similar work. And what we found in that is that we had one group of employees, our transportation modeling staff, who were significantly under market. But overall, most of our positions were under market. And so as a result, we've agreed to adjusting salaries up by 3% for all non-management employees, and that modeling group of employees receiving an additional 11.1% increase. Historically, SACOG has tried to keep pace with the market, and while we've been under, I think we've been relatively consistent in our market position, because we have not typically had a fixed adjustment in every year of our MOUs in the past. We've really had it move based on the consumer price index within some bounds. And so for the purposes of this MOU, we've agreed to a fixed amount for this fiscal year upcoming of 5%, acknowledging that the consumer price index is much higher than that. But in future years, we're going to return to our previous range, which is in our current MOU of 0 to 4% each year. Another thing we found in the independent pay and compensation review was that we were significantly under market in our health benefits. And so one of the things we're doing here is slightly adjusting up how much SACOG pays towards medical insurance. And as I mentioned, we're changing the amount the employees can get if they don't take insurance to really focus on health benefits as the purpose of this benefit and try to increase over time more towards the middle of the market in terms of what we offer for coverage of healthcare. The next area is in our paid time off, and SACOG has a system where we combine sick and vacation leave into something called paid time off. And under California law, that is something that vests with employees at the time they earn it. And so this creates a liability for SACOG as the employer. And one of the things that we've used in the past is offloading some of those hours into a 401A plan each year. We're agreeing here to reduce the cap of that so that those hours get off of SACOG's books sooner, and employees are still have those for their benefit. They're just coming at a lower cost to SACOG. The next area to cover, as I mentioned, is we're continuing the CalPERS cost sharing for existing employees. But for those employees who've been hired after PEPRA took effect, we're going to, for non-management employees, provide 1% of salary into a new 401A plan for them. So the next steps in this, if it's approved by the board today, is for the executive director to execute the final MOU based on what's attached. It would take effect for the most part on July 1st, with some changes to our ancillary benefits taking effect in January of next year. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the board?
Chris Branscombe, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Exactly how was this negotiated? Is there does the board have a compensation committee that's been involved in this?
So the way that the history of the MOU being formed is last year, we met with the board in closed session. The board appointed 3 negotiators for the agency. Myself, Casey Lazan, the other deputy executive director, and our finance director. And the board gave us parameters of principles going into the negotiations. And then we came back and consulted with the board prior to entering into the tentative agreement. So we don't have a set committee that works on compensation for the board. We do bring this back to the Policy and Innovation Committee and then the full board before acting.
Director Branscombe, and Eric just said the Policy and Innovation Committee really is the home committee for this. They've been
No, that answered the question. Thanks, James.
Any others? Okay, seeing none, is there any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Then with that, is there a motion?
I will move the item for Eric's.
Second, soon.
Second.
We have a motion by Ferrix, a second by Suen. Roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Director Baines,
Aye.
Bernasconi, absent Bradford,
Aye.
Branscombe,
Aye.
Houlihan,
Aye.
Burris,
Aye.
Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Desmond,
Aye.
Frericks,
Aye.
Frost,
Aye.
Gallardo,
Aye.
Gog,
Yes.
Gore,
Aye.
Guerrero,
Aye.
Harris,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Kozlowski. Director Kozlowski, could you indicate your vote, please? Okay, I'll come back to you. Lozano,
Aye.
Middleton, absent New,
Aye.
Sander, absent Saragosa,
Aye.
Sailor,
Aye.
Chenier,
Aye, and nice job.
Spokely,
Yes.
Stallard,
Aye.
Soon,
Aye.
Thomas,
Aye.
West. Absent. Vice Chair Kennedy.
Aye.
Chair Jennings is absent, and Director Kozlowski, if you're there, could you indicate your vote? I'll mark him absent, but motion carries.
Thank you. And thank you, Eric. It's such a small staff and almost a family. It must be at sometimes a little awkward during negotiations. But I think that was a very fair outcome and good for the organization. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Okay, next item.
The next item on our agenda is our workshop, Engage, Empower, Implement program. And Rosie Ramos of our staff will kick off the workshop, and then she'll introduce the first speaker.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm just going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Rosie Ramos Gomez, and today I'm here to talk about the Engage, Empower, Implement program, or EEI for short, another acronym. As a reminder, in 2020, as part of the board's action on the funding commitments for the last funding round, you established a pot of seed money for a disadvantaged communities pipeline program, and that's this program rebranded. You heard a little bit about EEI through some presentations from my colleagues when referring to the next funding rounds, but today I'm here to give a little bit more information and an overview of what our plans are for this program and what you can expect from us in the coming months. We also will have an opportunity, as was already mentioned, to hear from some great peer agencies as they've done similar work in their respective regions. Before I get into the specifics of this program, I want to start off by acknowledging that last month you adopted our racial equity statement of commitment and change that acknowledges the history of systemic racism in government institutions and how that has affected Black, Indigenous, Asian, Pacific Islanders, Hispanic, and Latinx, and other communities of color in our region. And we know that our residents that identify with any of these racial and ethnic categories that I just mentioned have been explicitly left out from federal, state, and local policies that have led to major disparities in health, transportation, and housing, wealth and education, and other aspects of life that continue today. And redlining and racially restricted housing covenants, which is what you see on the screen at this moment, and exclusionary zoning deny the accumulation of generational wealth for many of us. And when it comes to transportation policies, it doesn't fare well either. According to the US Department of Transportation, 475,000 households and more than 1 million people were displaced to create new freeways across the country because they were seen as the disposable communities because of the makeup of the community itself, which were largely Black and Brown communities. So what does this have to do with EEI? Well, as you know, all of this is actually referenced in the racial equity statement that you adopted last month. And EEI is a first chance and our first step at correcting some of these wrongs and operationalizing our commitment in that statement. And I have the pleasure to manage this important program. So what is EEI? EEI is a seed funding that $3 million to create a pipeline of equitable, safe, and sustainable projects throughout the Sacramento region that are community-led. The process begins with the identification of issues and needs and continues with solution ideation, and finally will result in project design. Starting with engagement, we plan to create a program that enables our awardees to engage with the communities before any project is defined to learn what their priorities are and the challenges that they face. And after engaging with them and understanding their needs, we want to enable communities to create their own projects, to share power when it comes to project design so that these projects meet their needs and are the things that communities want. In other words, sharing that design process with community by bringing in the expertise of our planners, but through guidance and direction of community. And with the seed funding for our cities and counties, along with their community partners, to do the engagement, to understand community needs and empowering them to co-design projects in a process that shares power, we're able to create a pipeline of projects that are rooted in community with equity at their core. And these projects would then be ready to receive implementation funding from either SACOG funding sources or state and federal government programs. So we're still in the early stages of the funding program. And our first phase of work includes creating a framework that outlines the goals and the guidelines, the process, the metrics. And we also want to develop resources and tools and other materials needed for our cities and counties and the community partners to do this type of work. And to create all of this, we need to listen and learn to those community organizations, partners, and stakeholders, but most importantly, and of course, the cities and counties that we serve, your jurisdictions. And these framework components will directly inform the resulting EEI funding application requirements. Excuse me. One important piece for EEI will be to bring on consultants to help us because we do not have all of the answers. And we currently plan to bring on 2 consultants, one with technical expertise regarding equity and one a CBO partner that will lead the program's engagement efforts. And the CBO partner will help us engage with different organizations throughout the region that will help us develop the framework and the tools and resources needed to make EEI a success. And additionally, we will work directly with your cities and counties to ensure that this funding program is accessible and that SACOG provides tools and resources that they would need to do this type of work. And so that the projects that come out of this will be ready for future funding and implementation. And I want to note that there are a lot of pieces that we still need to define. We're trying to make this a collaborative effort with our CBOs and in our cities and counties so that the framework is truly equitable. And so here you see a visual representation of the various components I just went over. SACOG will work with the lead partner, a CBO partner, a working group that can bring in the community perspectives, engage with this board and our cities and counties, as well as bringing in other partners and stakeholders as needed. And we will lean on our technical consultant with equity experience to help guide this process. And here you see our timeline. Through the spring, we'll be bringing on our consultant and partner and creating that working group. And through the summer, we will create all of the different pieces that I mentioned for the framework. And we plan to bring a framework for you in late fall of 2022. And we would then be ready for releasing call for applicants in early 2023. So that's it for my presentation. I can pause now and take any questions that you might have. We will have more time for Q&A after our presenters. So I'll pause for really a few minutes if you have any questions.
Are there any questions of Rosie at this time before the presenters? Seeing none, we will move on.
Okay, well then I do want to turn it over to our guests from MTC that have been doing similar work. You'll hear from our peers at SJCOG as well after them, who's also been doing a lot of great work. And now I'd like to introduce you to Therese Trivedi, who is the Assistant Planning Director at MTC, our sister agency in the Bay Area, and she oversees their community-based transportation planning program. Thank you.
Good morning, directors. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you, Rosie, for the introduction. I am going to share my screen as we get started here and giving you some information about the program that a similar program that we have. And let me just hit the slide deck here, or the presentation mode. There we go. So I wanted to just first start out by saying it sounds like staff is well on their way to creating a successful program. So I think you'll see some parallels in what we have done in the Bay Area. So I will be launching into that in a moment, but let me just start out by again introducing myself. I'm Therese Trivedi. I'm an Assistant Planning Director in the Regional Planning Program with MTC and ABAG, and I oversee our mobility team. And one of the initiatives in our program or in our portfolio is the Community-Based Transportation Planning Program. And before I get into some of the details about the program, I did want to acknowledge the relationship to our Plan Bay Area 2050 plan, our long-range transportation plan, sustainable community strategy. And the little badge up there in the corner shows that it shows one of our transportation strategies, but I wanted to note that the community-based transportation planning program and, the CBTP program, another acronym I'm going to throw at you, is an implementation element of our plan. It really is one of the implementation aspects of this transportation strategy to enhance community enhancements. Transportation enhancement. So I just wanted to make sure that there is a connection to our long-range plan here. So now I'm going to provide you with a little bit of information about our program. It is not a new program. It was launched in 2002 with the goal of enhancing mobility, the mobility of residents in our equity priority communities. And the process engages communities to identify their transportation needs as well as solutions to address those needs. And just taking a moment to talk about what our equity priority communities are, they're essentially census tracts that have significant concentrations of underserved populations, such as households with low incomes and people of color. And the map that you can see on the screen here shows where those communities are located in our region. And you can see that they're spread out throughout. There's at least one in every county, and they're in both our urban centers, suburban communities, as well as even some of our rural areas. So how our program works is that MTC provides the funding, and we also develop guidelines for the program, excuse me, but then funding is then transferred to each of our 9 county congestion management agencies, or they're known as our county transportation agencies. And they lead the effort with and work collaboratively with community-based organizations, the cities, transit agencies, health and social service agencies, as well as other relevant stakeholders. And since the plan's inception, we've completed 48 plans, and some of those are some updates to some of the plans that were done earlier in that timeframe. But it's an ongoing program, and we have several more plans underway right now. And the end result is a planning document that outlines a number of solutions that have been developed as a result of the outreach that went into developing the plan itself. And it will require a variety of funding sources to implement all of those solutions. And my next slide will give a little more information about why that is. When we first developed the program, it was in 2002. It was a time when we were coming out, or were in a recession, and transit lines had been cut or rerouted, or there was a lot of flux going on with transit at the time. So we expected that there would be a lot of solutions oriented around transit service, and that is the case. You can see over a third of the solutions are still focused on transit, but there are quite a large array of other types of solutions that communities have identified to meet their needs. And almost half of them are active transportation related. And this, obviously refers to walking and biking, but it also there's many things that go along with that, such as safety related to walking and biking, like improved lighting or intersection improvements, or even sidewalks, either repair, or some communities don't have them at all. So that, is just a sampling of some of the types of solutions emerging out of the active transportation set here. And then there are also auto-related projects that come out, such as car sharing or dial-a-ride services, or even traffic safety improvements. So now I'm just going to highlight 2 plans that were recently completed, just giving a couple of high-level, perhaps takeaways that you might consider as you're developing your own program. The first one is in Portsmouth Square, which is a neighborhood within Chinatown in San Francisco. It's a very bustling area around Portsmouth Square. There is a lot of pedestrian activity, but there's also tourists that are coming in and out, and a lot of traffic as well. So I think the thing I wanted to note with this plan was that the Congestion Management Agency, or our CTA, was able to contract with a local community-based organization who was able to help with outreach, both through distributing surveys and through observation. And so that is one of the things that we do try to highlight in our program, is to really compensate community-based organizations to help with the work that is being done in their communities. And then I guess I will just highlight the recommendations that came out of here. The plan tried to really focus on a very small geographic area, and then highlighted near-term high priority solutions that did include pedestrian safety and Americans with Disabilities Act intersection and access improvements, as well as vehicle loading. That was another barrier that was identified as a safety concern in this area. So that was something that may not have been thought about going in. So just be open to the types of solutions that you might hear about that the community raises. Next, I want to go pretty far south down in our region to a more suburban community south of San Jose in Morgan Hill. They recently completed their plan in 2020, and they did focus on a larger geographic area throughout their equity priority community. And a couple of things to highlight here. They incorporated a variety of outreach strategies, and they really tried to, used many types of workshops and meetings and tablings. Of course, this was before the pandemic, but they also, I guess I wanted to highlight the different types of perspectives they were trying to hear from. And one of them was youth. And so I think that was something to highlight to when you're thinking about the outreach plans, like who you really want to hear from and to really engage a broad spectrum of the community. The other thing I wanted to mention about this plan is that once they identified about 20 different transportation proposals, and then they went through and they applied different criteria to really sort of flesh out and understand what it would take to advance to implementation those various proposals. So they looked at who might be the lead agency, sort of the financial feasibility, like how cost effective was the solution, how easy was it going to be to implement the solution, what were the community benefits, and then the timeline. Was it going to be something that could be delivered in the near term, the midterm, or something longer term that would take more than 7 years? And then finally, on this plan, I just wanted to note that with our counties, some of them do have local sales tax measures. And in this case, they were able to advance one of the projects, a proposal to have a city-run shuttle service, and they were able to fund that through the local sales tax measure. So that is just getting started. So now I wanted to take us back up to the regional level. And as I mentioned, we've had this program for a number of years, and we've most recently just finished a 4-year funding cycle. And before we head into the next one, we wanted to do a staff-led evaluation to take a look at how the program worked over the past 4 years in case there were any adjustments that we'd like to make to the guidelines as we head into the next cycle. So that's what we were hoping to achieve. And our evaluation focused both on the planning process as well as implementation and funding. So my next slide shows some of the lessons that we learned, or the key themes. And this might be something that to think about as you're developing your program as well. One of the pieces of feedback we heard was, just make sure that you have enough funding for the planning process. Doing engagement is labor and time intensive. So just wanting to make sure that you have enough funding available to really do the job that you want to achieve with that. A couple of other things related to who's involved and how. We really want to make sure that the cities are involved more closely. Because many of the solutions that do come out of the plans do involve the cities and can be implemented at the local level. So we want to make sure that someone from the city is there at the beginning and really engaged in the process. And then in terms of CBOs, our community-based organizations, I mentioned earlier, we really do try to make sure that we're able to compensate the CBOs when we can, and also maybe extend that to residents as well. So we do acknowledge that it does take time and energy to participate in these processes, and we want to compensate organizations and residents accordingly. On the lower level here, we have a couple more. Just as I noted, MTC does identify the guidelines and passes the funding along to the counties, but we just want to make sure that MTC is involved in the development of the scopes of work so that we are achieving the outcomes that we've identified in the guidelines. We also want to acknowledge that when these projects are getting up and running, that there is a connection to related planning efforts. I think, I'm sure you are familiar with outreach fatigue, and sometimes communities are tapped multiple times to hear or to get their opinions. And, we don't want to keep going back for the same questions or, similar questions. So really to make sure that you're tapping into other efforts that have been completed. And then finally, on the development of implementation and the development of solutions, just to make sure that there is enough detail provided so that when it is time to, apply for a funding program and you go back to the plan, there's enough information there that you can put together an application. We found that in some of our earlier plans, it would just say safety improvements, and it may not specify the location or whether that meant better lighting or, safety improvements on the ground. So just to make sure that we're documenting that as the plans are developed. So my last slide here is again focused on looking ahead towards implementation and our next planning cycle. We do propose to increase the level of funding for the plans themselves, but we are hoping to establish a technical assistance program so that we can help some of the projects that are coming out of these plans get ready for implementation. Sometimes they're more conceptual in nature, and they might be a smaller scale project that doesn't always make its way into a city's capital improvement program. So the TA program is really going to be there to help projects get from concept to design to eventually like a shovel-ready project. And that would help to set up the projects to compete for regional and state funding programs. So I hope this has been helpful information, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great. Are there any questions from the board? I believe Director Gore has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that presentation. A question for you about engagement with the community during sort of our virtual situation. And I don't know when this is done. It seems like it's been a little while ago, but I know it's really challenging to get communities involved, in person. And so I wanted to know sort of your experience, if you've had the experience with doing outreach to some of these communities virtually, and just how that's worked, because, it's hard to get people places, but also does this virtual format work? I mean, I'm guessing you have to do a hybrid, but I'd just like to hear your experience.
Well, that's a good question. And there were a couple CBTPs that were underway and had plans for engagement, and the pandemic had another direction to take us. So some did pause, but we do have one that was completed completely during the pandemic, and it was virtual. It was in San Francisco around Lake Merced, and it was very focused. It was, again, around active transportation, but there were, I think, surveys, using, Zoom and, working with CBOs to have virtual engagement as well as, sort of electronic. So I think that it is a challenge, and some communities it's going to work, and others, you may want to wait. And maybe, we live in a climate where there are outdoor activities, and sometimes, attending farmers markets or having a table somewhere, those are some strategies that can also be used, at any time.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, Director Clark-Kretz.
Thank you. And thank you, Teresa. That was a great presentation. I have a question about the Portsmouth Square and the community-based organization that was chosen, and how are those CBOs chosen? I would be really interested in that. And I loved the fact that in the next project you did, you had that youth perspective, which I think is so huge, because it's greatly important to hear from our youth. And I just wondered how the CBOs were chosen, if you could go into that a little bit.
Sure. I think my answer is going to focus on a little bit of the challenges that also go along with engaging with CBOs. Sometimes some of the CBOs have more capacity than others. And I think that there was a sort of a research and advocacy organization that was able to kind of step up and be able to do some of the work. Sometimes that isn't always the case, that, staffing is really a challenge, and, there isn't really the capacity, but that can also be an opportunity to help organizations learn about the transportation planning process, and, especially if there is funding that goes along with it, that they can develop that capacity. So I think that is an opportunity. The one other challenge I guess I would note is that we do fund this program with federal funds, and contracting and the administrative aspect of contracting with the CBO is a big challenge, especially when they're federally funded. So we are looking at ways that we can, use other funding sources that will make it a lot easier. So I think the answer varies, and it kind of depends. There are some CBOs that are very established in the neighborhoods. And so I think, using your local resources to identify who those are and who may have the capacity, and to bring them along in the process.
Thank you.
Director Thomas.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for the presentation. My question to you is, in your experience, how did project in your rural regions remain competitive with perhaps urban projects?
Well, I think that's a good question. And I think I would add that, our program does have to build in flexibility, because we do have a range of different types of communities in the region. So we do allow for flexibility. And I think because the projects are completed at the county level, I think within a county, I think there is more, competitive playing field available to them. And we also think that cities can also help to, within a city or a county, help to prioritize those projects. But I think at the regional level, I guess what I would say is some of our funding is, the regional funding is allocated at the county level. So there is more competition at that level. So they're not necessarily competing for a regional funding pot, but we do try to build in flexibility to allow for various solutions, and it's not a one size fits all.
Great, thank you so much.
Director Sander, do you have your hand up?
I do. There's always this question about, at least a more modern question about gathering public input and the methodology we put into that, as well as the sort of questions we ask. You don't want to ask a neighborhood group, how are we going to engineer this bridge? But you do want to ask them what their lifestyle interacting with that bridge might be like, what they would hope to accomplish by having a new bridge there. So I'm curious in the context of this presentation, how do you right size that public input? Because I think a lot of times we go out, we gather public input and we say, oh, isn't that wonderful? But it's nothing we can do anything with. So I heard you start to talk about that, and I would just like to hear a little bit more about it.
Well, I think, going in with an open mind and engaging with the local partners, the CBOs, or the folks who are familiar with the community, and then really listening to the community, you might hear something different than what you expected to going in. And it might not be about the engineering of the bridge, of course, but like really where people are trying to travel to, what some of their challenges, what their barriers are, and, trying to come up sometimes creatively with some solutions that, you might not have thought of going in. So I don't know if that answers your question directly, but I think it's understanding your community going in, and then, really leveraging the wisdom and knowledge in the community to help to best engage with the community about what the needs are, and then how collectively a solution could be approached.
Yeah, I guess the hard part is just getting past the same community voices you hear on this topic over decades, as opposed to a real sampling of the public, like a scientific sampling of the public opinion on a given question.
Yes, those are definitely some challenges to, I think, in each community is going to be a little bit different on how you can approach that.
Is that all, Director Sander? Okay.
Yep, I'm good.
Thank you. Director Guerrero.
Thank you. As far as the outreach, what I found to be successful in West Sacramento, I think it's just hard through social media networks and our limited, city departmental support to get outreach out there. What we found to be effective was the education email system. And if there's a way that any of our CBOs are able to connect with the school districts and, in any higher level education, to send emails out so that people are aware of these opportunities to provide input, I found that to be pretty effective. But I do think that it's important to, to do a comprehensive or even hire, an outside firm to do some, strategic social media or engagement efforts. I think relying on even just the small cities themselves are, we're pretty limited, but, or even a community-based organization is sometimes it's not going to provide the reach I think is necessary for the type of input we're seeking. So just wanted to provide some other ideas or maybe a little brainstorming session on what cities have found to be the most effective.
And thank you for raising that. One thing I did not mention is that oftentimes the CTA, the Congestion Management Agency, will hire a consultant to help with the process. So there are others who, do this regularly to kind of help manage the process. So that is something that is also part of the process.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? I have one, Teresa, and thank you for your presentation. So Sacramento region, not unlike a lot of regions, is extremely diverse in its jurisdictions, from the sizes of our cities and counties to rural to suburban to urban. How does the MTC go about making sure that all of these areas are served through this process?
Well, that is a good question. We do try to build in flexibility to allow the CTAs to, kind of best approach their communities in the way that they think makes the most sense. And I will say that, we do focus on our equity priority communities, but those are really communities where there are concentrations of, our transportation disadvantage. But there are also other areas that have communities that, may not fall into one of those equity priority communities. So we do leave the flexibility open to identify transportation disadvantaged areas if there is going to be some effort to look beyond those communities. So we do build that into the process. And I will also say that some counties have taken more of a county-wide approach to really cover all the bases within their county. And we just recommend that then the solutions are also applying to all those different areas. So the benefit of having it be a defined geographic area is that that's where the solutions will be oriented. But if you do take a step back and look more broadly, that the solutions will also be connected to areas that where the barriers are located.
Thank you. And to the degree that you want to answer this question to help us, if there were mistakes that were made that you would, looking back, wish you had avoided that you could help us avoid, were there any?
Well, I mean, I think there's always lessons learned. Yeah. And I think, the using federal funds for engaging with community-based organizations or community members directly, I think that is a lesson we've learned ourselves, and we're trying to find a way around that. I also think involving the cities, and I know it's hard because city staffs are stretched, but really engaging cities, because I think, especially with all the active transportation types of solutions, cities can play a really big role in advancing some of those projects. And again, I think I also heard that you're already going in this direction, but having the resources available to take some of these concepts, and communities might not have the resources to advance a project or even know how to advance a project. So making sure that you have those resources available to take those ideas to become realities, because I think what we don't want is these plans that never get implemented, and then you kind of go back to update the plan and the community is like, well, we haven't seen the solutions that we told you about last time. So I think really trying to advance implementation, and it's a challenge for everybody, but I think that's an area to focus on.
Great. Thank you so much, Teresa. I see no more raised hands. So with that, we'll introduce Dianne Nguyen from the San Joaquin Council of Governments. Welcome, Dianne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, SACOG board members and staff. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about one project that has come to fruition, and wanted to thank Executive Director James Corliss for reaching out to me. He heard about this project, and he asked me, Dianne, what's your secret? How did you get it done? And thought for myself, gosh, that's a really good question. So I want to open up with telling you a little bit about our region and introducing a fellow presenters, Jasmine Leak. I brought in. She is with a CBO that is part of the project, one of many partners in the project I'll be talking about. And then the project manager on staff at COG, Christine Corrales, who is born and raised in the city of Stockton, leading this project. So Christine, if you can cue up the slide. From as many of you know, San Joaquin COG is a one county COG. And we have 7 cities. Next slide, please. And the county of San Joaquin that make up our Council of Governments. Even though we are a one county COG, we have very many similarities with SACOG and MPC. We're a diverse mix of people. And in fact, San Joaquin County is a majority minority population county. So minority communities and demographics are predominant in our makeup. We also have a mix of rural and urban needs, and we have a major big city of Stockton. Next slide, please. When we developed this project for the grant, which we secured from the Air Resources Board, it actually was a culmination, I would say, of over a decade of bringing in non-traditional and traditional partners to the planning table at the San Joaquin Council of Governments. First off, I would say as part of I call it our secret sauce or a special sauce in our regional planning process over the decade plus, we encourage staff to come into the communities and be boots on the ground with what's happening. In fact, I pride myself in saying a majority of our staff at San Joaquin COG, they have been raised in the community. Many of them have been born in the community and have decided when they got out of college to come back and make their community better. That is the value of that is just immeasurable. Not only that, by being members of the community, being raised in the community, they bring a network of people and faith-based organizations and other contacts to the table as a staff member. And building that network and knowing who to contact is always key to advancing the planning process. We also regularly at COG hold speaker series or topics. And I know that my sister agencies, SACOG, MTC, they do it as well. But that enables us to engage with other interested stakeholders and learn more from them. Another key thing is our mini grant program. When I was starting in my planning career, and we would hold public meetings to get input on the planning process. Back in the day, 25 plus years ago, I'd remember to say, oh, put down on the flyer, we have some refreshments. We'll have some cookies or sandwiches or whatever as an incentive to bring people into the community participatory process. I can tell you that little line of we have refreshments is not enough. In fact, the mini grant program is a best practice that we took from our sister agency, MTC. And that mini grant program is a couple of things. One, I will say, as much as we try to get out there in the community as a San Joaquin Council of Governments, there's many in our region that don't know what SJCOG is and what SJCOG stands for. So in the mini grant program, we gave $3,000 to $5,000 grants to community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, nonprofits, so they can be the messenger of some of the COG planning work, send it out to their constituents or their customer base under their email, under their name, because this is what's recognized by their folks. And then they can also translate what we're trying to do at the COG and say, hey, this is SJCOG, they're doing this impacts us as a CBO or nonprofit. and please come to their public meeting. That has been a complete game changer in bringing more folks to the table for our planning process. Next slide. Through all of this work, we were able to strengthen our connections. And the grant I talked about is an air resources grant, which San Joaquin COG applied for last year. And it's called the Sustainable Transportation Equity Program, STEP. We applied for a project we call the Stockton Mobility Collective. And this is the first ever grant offered by the Air Resources Board to infuse transportation options to disadvantaged communities and only disadvantaged communities. We chose City of Stockton, and particularly the cluster of very low income and racially diverse census tracts in South Stockton, which, if you know our area, it's the area south of Highway 4, between I-5 and 99. And that pocket is an extremely disadvantaged area. How we chose it, pretty easy. It's as being a one county COG, this pocket is like I said, the most challenged. And so we applied for the grant, and we were one of only 3 recipients statewide. The other 2 recipients for this equity transportation at disadvantage grant were from LA County. So I felt that that put City of Stockton on the map. We certainly are a community that has great residents, but they have limited options to transportation. And I'm a firm believer that access to transportation and reliable transportation changes someone's career path and opportunities to school and college, and of course, quality of life. So City of Stockton was the subject of this grant. This grant we secured netted us $7.5 million to infuse in Stockton electric bikes, electric cars, EV chargers, and workforce development, and the expansion of a mobile ticketing app for transit, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Next slide. So moving forward, how we got to this successful grant, which I'm very excited about, is going to be deployed this year and be multi-years over several years per the grant. And it is, again, the result of being engaged in the community. Being engaged means more than just social media. We make a point to know what's happening from other events that are happening in the community-based organizations or nonprofits, and we send staff there. We actually have staff be involved, in subcommittees or special committees on community events. That's how you learn what's going on. That's how you network, and that's how you know people. And through that kind of symbiotic relationship, they come to the table in our process. I mentioned the partnerships and the mini grants. There was a question earlier about virtual engagement. I will say community-wide social virtual meetings, not so great during COVID, especially if you're trying to target an economically disadvantaged community who may have limited resources. They may not, likely may not know what a Zoom account is to even connect, but we did find that virtual engagement was robust for the leaderships of CBOs and nonprofits. They made a point to stay connected to what we're doing through these virtual meetings, and through their commitment, they spread the word through their customer base, and also incentives. Now, when I say incentives, what we're pivoting in this grant that we secured is something we've never done before, and that is to pay people to come and be involved in the process. One part of the grant is establishing a committee, and we have designated a community resident who we will offer a stipend to attend the regular meetings so that they can be engaged. And also, certainly it's not a salary, but just a little bit, we hope is an incentive to stay connected with the process. So that's something new that we're deploying, and I hope it is something that becomes a best practice after we go through this process. Next slide. I wanted to touch a little bit on that boots on the ground concept, These are slides from our regional transportation plan and other community planning efforts we've done. You've heard tabletops, you've heard the reference to farmers market. One of these pictures are from a farmers market. When there is a community event, we find it, we put a tabletop there, and we talk about San Joaquin COG and what we're doing. So this is a few pictures from work over the years. Next slide. I think the match that really lit the ability for us to secure an implementation grant to bring the electric bikes and electric cars into South Stockton was our work on the first ever mobile ticketing transit app in California. Now in San Joaquin, we have our regional transit district, just like you have in the Sacramento area, SAC-RT. I have to say, I'm a 20-year resident of the city of Elk Grove, and part of my career was here in the Sacramento region and working with SACOG when I was in transportation consulting. And I know firsthand the great work that SACOG does and the city of Elk Grove in improving the quality of life for its people. And we're trying to replicate and meet those same standards here in San Joaquin. With this mobile ticketing app, the first ever, I called it, with a team of our transit operators, Easy Hub, to target the concept of hub mobility, putting everything in one place so that it has accessibility and convenience to the customer. Right now, Easy Hub is for connecting all the transit operators in one mobile ticketing app, where someone who is a transit rider can buy a ticket for any one of the transit operators in San Joaquin, even the rail transit operator, all in one place. And the vision for Easy Hub was to expand it to Stanislaus County. And also it was to not just have it as transit. I call it a project that is a pearl on a string, a string of pearls on a necklace that we're trying to build. So with this pearl, it allowed us to talk about the accomplishment of this Easy Hub transit mobile ticketing app, and that our efforts in the grant would be to expand it to Stanislaus County and include mobile ticketing for the electric bikes and the electric cars that we are deploying in this Air Resources Board grant. So that's what I mean by a string of pearls, slowly connecting the dots, if you will, to provide the very best to the people of San Joaquin. Next slide. Wanted to close with just a conglomeration of the folks we brought to the table. And I will tell you, some of them are very familiar with us and have been connected with San Joaquin COG through our regional planning efforts. Some of them brand new to the table. And how we were able to do that is the old school cold call. We would call people up and say, this is who we are. We're doing this event. We've got this happening. Can you take some time to meet with us one-on-one? Can you take a few minutes to hear about what we're doing? Can you show up at this workshop? And that's how a lot of people who, I would say, some would say, I don't know who you are. And then we would say who we are. And that got them engaged. And the medley of people here are the ones that will be critical in advancing this $7.5 million grant that we got from the Air Resources Board. I wanted to close there and then introduce from one of our partners, a community-based organization, Jasmine Leak, and she can give you her perspective of what it's like working with a regional agency, San Joaquin COG.
Thank you so much, Dianne. Good morning, everyone. As Dianne mentioned, my name is Jasmine Leak, and I am the managing director at Third City Coalition, where our mission is to connect local change makers across all backgrounds to form strong, lasting partnerships. And these partnerships are part of a broader strategy to ignite civic pride and engagement here in Stockton, bring positive investments to the city, and really shift the narrative toward one that is more inclusive and that fully understands and realizes our past, present, and future of our city. So next slide, please. So as Dianne mentioned, I will say I'm also a Stockton native. I returned back into my hometown in 2014 and established Third City Coalition in early 2016 with a group of others like myself who were returning back home with kind of more fresh adult eyes. And And our initial mission with starting Third City Coalition was really about placemaking. It was really about getting people to be more involved in community activities and public events, to reclaim the narratives about the city that grew us and that we all love and hold so much history, but really reshape the trajectory of the city. And so one thing that we learned through this process was we would start to ask questions about, what do you want to see more of in your community? What are some of the challenges that are showing up in your neighborhood? And we kept hearing a lot of ideas that were things that we could address through policy change. And so while we started out as a very volunteer-oriented organization focused primarily on placemaking, we started to see through meeting organizations like San Joaquin Council of Governments, from meeting staff from other public agencies, that there were some of these challenges that we could address together. And so, many of them were transportation related. So we heard, people wanted more bike lanes, they wanted more walkable neighborhoods, they wanted to be able to become more involved in issues like around housing security, but they didn't quite know how to get there. And they didn't know, we were speaking different languages. I think the languages that the community, first of all, there are many languages spoken here in Stockton, but quite literally planning language versus how residents understand and observe the built environment is very different. They're not any more or less valid, but just there is a translation that's required. And even though we are not planners by trade at Third City Coalition, we have built up that knowledge enough and partnered with our friends at the Council of Governments who do hold this knowledge. And as Dianne mentioned, really wanted to engage with the community. And so early on, we formed a great partnership with the Council of Governments in hosting these types of events. But back in 2018, we learned about an opportunity called the Transformative Climate Communities Program. Some of you may be familiar with this. It's a program led by the Strategic Growth Council, and really saw that we had a lot of the pieces needed to successfully source and implement a planning grant that would allow us to do this community visioning around climate smart investments and build a community-led planning document that would reflect the needs and priorities of the community and some of their ideas. And so if you can take me to the next slide, that would be great. So we were successful in doing that in 2019, and that allowed us to bring together a group of diverse stakeholders, including residents, including other CBO partners, including public agencies from around the region, to really diagnose and understand the community's issues. And while it's not a perfect document from a technical standpoint, it really frames the community's ideas nicely. And it was catalytic in that it galvanized partners and the stakeholders around a common agenda. It invited participation from new agencies and really gave us the opportunity to build some time together for project identification and implementation planning. And one of the priority issues that were identified was transportation. And there were a number of ideas generated, but really no feasible plans. And so because of the support of the San Joaquin Council of Governments and their initiative in addressing some of these solutions, Dianne, I really want to thank you for having the leadership to rally partners around some of these issues, because that's what it takes. And I think that's the main point here is we started to see things differently when we started to approach these issues as common challenges. We started to see that certain agencies were well positioned to take on some of these challenges, while others may not be, just because of their positionality or where they are in that moment. And we were able to bring in, partners from the universities also to bolster these ideas and really vet the feasibility of some of these ideas and make sure that as we're we're doing some of these kind of more riskier investments or piloting new ideas, we would have an evaluation of those as well. And so I think that those were really important aspects of the planning process. Next slide, please. And I do want to say, you know, just one more thing that that has been great about working with Council of Governments is it has allowed us to bring meaning to the work that they are doing and that we want to see happen in our community. And it's allowed us to really expedite that process, and it's opened up much more teamwork. And we've really been able to, as Dianne said, have a more robust end product and outcome that we all really want, which is, you know, to have safe, healthy, accessible, equitable communities. And yeah, it's just been a real joy working with them. And, you know, it leads me to, I think, our next presenter, which is Christine, who's going to talk a little bit more in detail about the work that we are doing with the Stockton Council of Governments in the Stockton Mobility Collective. So thanks for the opportunity to share.
Thanks for teeing me up, Jasmine. Good morning. My name is Christine Corrales. I serve as the project manager for the flagship project that Dianne was describing at the top of our presentation here. And so I wanted to do a little bit of a brief overview of the project and let you all know where we're at in terms of meeting some of our key milestones in upcoming weeks. And so with our $7.4 million grant from the California Air Resources Board, we have a project portfolio of 6 distinct projects here. And this is a multi-year initiations and operations project that will improve mobility and equity in our region's most disadvantaged neighborhoods. Just to give you a quick overview, the community engagement project will provide ongoing opportunities to inform, gather feedback, and promote the various projects included in this portfolio. We have a Vamos Easy Hub project, Dianne also mentioned earlier, in which we plan to expand the mobile ticketing to Stanislaus County through the existing app, as well as integrate new services that we are piloting through this project portfolio. Our e-car share program will be the first in the region, and it will provide 30 electric vehicles at 5 to 7 charging stations in our project area, primarily co-located at affordable housing locations or city-owned and operated facilities. We also have an e-bike share program that we plan to implement in partnership with the Regional Transit District here in San Joaquin County, with 100 e-bikes and 10 to 15 stations in the project area. There's a workforce development component, providing job training curriculum to prepare our local workforce to help and become involved in the operations and maintenance of these new systems. And lastly, an incentives program that will provide funds directly to those income qualifying residents so that we can reduce the cost burden of transportation. So SJCOG serves as the lead agency on this project, and we've got a long list of partners to implement these 6 projects, including all of these organizations listed on your screen here. And I wanted to highlight Third City as one of our key partners, especially on the ground with our community engagement work. And then just to give you all a brief kind of overview of what's coming up in our project, we've finished, you know, all of the administrative pieces of getting everyone under contract and developing some implementation plans. And we're getting ready at the end of this month to launch into a more public-facing phase of our project with demonstration events. Our first inaugural event is actually going to be happening next weekend, March 26th, at Conway Homes, which is the Housing Authority's site in our project area. And at these demonstration events, we'll be providing community with opportunities to test ride the e-bikes and preview the electric vehicles and learn how to charge EVs. A lot of times in our communities, this is a kind of a foreign thing. And so part of it is educating folks on how to use the systems. And we're planning on doing additional events throughout the spring and summer to really generate support and interest in signing up for these programs when we launch in late 2022. And so with that, I will conclude and pass the mic back to Dianne for Q&A.
Well, thank you again, SACOG board members. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Teresa. Well, Teresa earlier, Jasmine and Christina. We really appreciate your valuable input. Could we take the screen down and so I can see if there's any? Okay, thank you. Are there any questions of the board? Okay, I'll start with one. Probably for Diane. This is kind of in the weeds, but I agree with you. We're beyond the days of coffee and donuts to get valuable community input. So you talked about those micro grants, which I think is a great idea. Roughly, what size of micro grants are we talking about, and how do you choose which organizations are recipients?
The size of the grants are $3,000 to $5,000.
Okay.
And they're directly given to the organization. How we choose is we issue a call for projects, call for submissions, and we have an established budget. I think our first budget was something like 30 grand, and we just review the applications on an ongoing basis. First, we set a deadline and didn't get the robust response per deadline, so I said lift the deadline. If we're still actively engaging the community, because it's never a one-shot deal, it's multi-months, let's leave it open until we exhaust the funds. And so that's how we do it. An application process, review the application, we meet with the applicant. I'll tell you, every applicant who has applied has gotten the grant. I wish I could say we've exhausted our budget. We have not. So it's something that has been a value add, but certainly more room and more interest is something we would want to improve upon. And that's just getting the word out, the word of mouth with the successes of those who have completed the robust outreach we're looking for through their network. They can spread the word on these micro grants.
And with the relationships that you've built, how are you, building on that, using those as for other projects and other areas that SJCOG is involved in?
I'm a firm believer in it's what you know, and it's also who you know. And we capitalize on that network. How we're doing it specifically, I would say easily half of the the partner logos you've seen, we've met them or worked with them directly on other planning projects. So they became what I call walk-ons. They walked on this other project that we're doing. I want to say it's kind of like you're stuck with us. We love you. We love what you're doing, and we'd like to continue that relationship. An example is Institute of Local Government approached us for a program that they had on homelessness. Actually, they came to us, and we were impressed with how we worked with them effectively, and we carried them. Then we approached them backwards to help us with the community, to have them help us with community outreach in the STEP grant. So I would say it's like a network that continues to expand. I can go on and on about how each of us know each other through some other planning project at the COG.
Thank you very much. If there's no more questions from the board, I will, we do. Director Swin.
Thanks, Chair Kennedy. Hi, Diane. It's great to see you again, and so glad to see you thriving over at SJCOG. I remember when you went over there several years ago. So they're lucky to have you. I was curious about whether it's you or Christine can answer this. We, here at SACOG, many of our suburban communities are still looking into, e-bikes and bike share down in our suburban areas. And, San Joaquin County is, I feel like, is very similar to our suburban areas. What has your feedback been as you done this outreach for e-bikes, and maybe how has it been different to enable you to implement an actual e-bike program down there?
I'll answer quickly, and then Christine, if you can add on. So I have my fingers crossed, because this has not happened, and we expect to deploy both the electric bikes and the electric cars later this year. The feedback in the development of this concept was the number one, the cost. This is not going to be free. And it seems very counterintuitive to deploy this type of technology and capital investment in a very, very poor area. So the feedback we got is you've got to find that sweet spot of offsetting the cost of utilizing the electric car or the electric bike if you want to have people use it. Absolutely. Let me tell you about myself. I didn't grow up with a lot of money, and $5 is $5. And if you don't have $5, you're not going to use it on a transit ticket. You're not going to use it to get on an electric bike. So we're trying to find that sweet spot so that it is an incentive for that. And we've got a team looking into what that number is, still in development. The other thing is location. In transportation, you put it in the wrong spot, no one's going to use it. And the feedback we've gotten from the community is where it will be most successful to sprinkle these bikes. Our transit district actually had a e-bike study that looked at the Stockton area and charted it out with community outreach where the best locations are. And in terms of electric cars, I know you didn't ask that, but we're partnering with the San Joaquin Housing Authority, which builds affordable housing homes. And we are working with them on the best locations because they have an existing constituent base to use those electric cars as well as electric bikes. Christine, do you have anything to add?
Well, thank you both. It's very helpful.
All right, I see no more raised hands. So again, I want to thank all of our presenters. This was fantastic information. We can learn a lot from you, and I'm a true believer in not reinventing wheels. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
Vice Chair Kennedy, can I just say, not only were those some of the best presentations I've heard for a while, no disrespect to our former presenters who hopefully aren't listening. No, we love everybody. They're all great. But how cool an example of the mega region here, right? How wonderful a thing, as we and Dianne and Therese and people know this, and our board members on the mega region working group. But you know, there are so many side benefits to working more closely together. I think you'll agree with this, Dianne and Therese. We know each other already, right? But a little bit, maybe like Dianne, you're telling your story. There's nothing like actually getting in the trenches and working together on things. And we have things to learn from San Joaquin County and a lot of the work that MTC and ABAG are doing with their counties deep in communities. We have a lot to learn from that. And I think the connection to just the through line from adoption of your racial equity statement, as Rosie Ramos so aptly put it, right, to this workshop, this EEI program that I want to remind you, you've got $3 million, you've made a commitment to put $3 million in some ways as a seed fund, a down payment. And that covers 4 counties, and the 4-county funding round does not cover El Dorado and Placer County. And we're working with our 2 partner agencies there to figure out how we can truly make this a 6-county effort. Even all the way back to the raise application this morning. Honestly, Dianne, I've told you this, we're putting a raise application in some ways really kind of inspired by your comprehensive approach, I think, to trying to solve some of your challenges there in San Joaquin County. So kudos and thank you. And I hope everybody's getting those connections and the connecting the dots, because I think if anybody wants to sort of figure out what does it mean then now that we've adopted a racial equity statement, well, I think today has been a great example of what it could mean. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we are toward the end of our agenda, and we are on to reports. And first up is the chair's report. Hang on. Rick, do you have anything? Okay, we're good with the chair's report. Any board member reports? Not seeing any hands up. Mr. Corliss.
You clearly stole the comedy thunder from everybody right there, Mr. Vice Chair. I don't think anybody couldn't top that. Okay.
What he does.
Just a few things on my end. Again, just hope you're getting the updates that we send out. Really good news yesterday, and again, thanks to some of you, including Director Saylor, but many others of you have worked on this. Happy to announce that the CTC yesterday did put a commitment into the third track project between Sacramento and Roseville, which is really a mega regional project between the South Bay and the Bay Area and the greater Sacramento region, Placer County, and hopefully someday all the way across the summit. That commitment is good. The CTC did approve that yesterday, and thanks to Vice Mayor Howdeshell from the City of Roseville, Director Saylor representing CCJPA. So great news on that. Just a reminder that I think we have just about everybody, either you're going to Cap or you're not going to Cap, or you can't make the pre-tour. We have a few spots left on that Friday, April 29th tour of the Northern Virginia suburbs, looking at housing and infill housing and suburban revitalization and bus rapid transit. We're opening those up to other elected officials in this region who are going to Cap or even staff. If you've got city managers, county execs, let us know. We do have some spots. We've got a healthy number of board members. Happy to see all that. And with that, I'm gonna end my update. And congrats, Mr. Vice Chair, for one of the quickest board meetings we've had in recent memory.
It's why people keep electing me.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Yes, sir. Mr. Stollard.
Hitchhiking on James's comment, I want to mention that I am leading a midnight monument tour at Cap to Cap. It'll be Monday night of the event at 9:15 at the Mayflower Hotel. It'll be a 3-hour, 6-mile walk among all the monuments on the mall and around the mall. Thank you. All are welcome.
And highly recommended. It is great.
Whether you
5:15, that's a whole lot better than 8:30.
Whether you've done it or not, I suggest you do it. It's always a good time. So thank you, Director Stollard.
Thank you.
3-hour tours don't always end well.
I want everybody to know I sit in the bathroom and soak my feet in cold water when we're done. I recommend it.
Great. Thank you very much. If there's no more questions or comments from the board, let me just say happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. For those of you who are wearing green and I can see you, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'm going to give a particular shout out to Director Baines. So with that, thank you very much, and we are adjourned.